The story of the Allman Brothers Band is one of triumph, tragedy, redemption, dissolution, and more redemption. During the early 70s, they were arguably the most influential rock group in America, thanks in no small part to At Fillmore East, a high-water mark for concert albums, that redefined the scope of rock's musical boundaries. Duane Allman and Dickie Betts pioneered the twin lead guitar sound so prevalent during the decade that continued well into the 21st century. The group placed an emphasis on musicianship and seamlessly melding rock, blues, jazz, and R&B with extended improvisation. The band also included two very complimentary drummers in Butch Trucks and J. Johanny Johansson, aka J-Mo, a virtuoso bassist in Barry Oakley, and the grainy, soulful vocals and organ playing of Greg Allman, who sounded like a decades-older bluesman. They turned epic linked jam tracks such as Whipping Post and In Memory of Elizabeth Reed into FM radio staples. They directly influenced virtually all 70s rock acts south of the Mason-Dixon line, including the Marshall Tucker Band and Lynyrd Skynyrd, and the jam band movement of the 90s. 1973's Brothers and Sisters showcased a different aspect of their character with accessible radio-ready hit singles such as And Jessica. Even in their final incarnation with guitarists Derek Trucks and Warren Haynes, ABB churned out charting live albums such as 2003's Hittin' the Note. The group was founded in March 1969 by Duane Allman on guitar, Greg Allman on vocals and organ, Dickie Betts on guitar, Barry Oakley on bass, and Butch Trucks and J-Mo on drums. Duane and Greg Allman loved soul and R&B, although they listened to their share of rock and roll, especially as it sounded coming out of England in the mid-60s. Their first group was a local Daytona Beach garage band called The Escorts, who sounded a lot like the early Rolling Stones. They later became the Allman Joys and plunged into cream-style British blues. Then they became the Hourglass, which drew from and extended their soul influences. The group landed a contract with Liberty Records with help from the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, but the company wasted the opportunity on a pair of overproduced albums that failed to capture the Hourglass sound. The band split up after Liberty rejected a proposed third LP steeped in blues R&B. Duane Allman began working as a session guitarist at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and it was there, appearing on records by Wilson Pickett, Aretha Frank, John Hammond, King Curtis, among others, that he made his reputation. In 1969, coaxing of ex-Otis Redding manager Phil Walden, Allman gave up session work and began putting together a new band. J-Mo came aboard, and Allman's longtime friend Butch Trucks, and another Allman friend, Barry Oakley, joined, along with Dickie Betts, with whom Oakley was playing in a group called Second Coming. A marathon jam session ensued, at the end of which Allman had his band, except for a singer that came later, when his brother Greg agreed to join. They were duly signed to Walden's new Capricorn label. The Allman Brothers didn't record their first album until after they worked out their sound out on the road, playing heavily around Florida and Georgia. Their self-titled debut was a solid blues rock album and one of the better showcases for guitar pyrotechnics in a year, with more than its share of albums by Cream, Blind Faith, the Jeff Beck Group, and Led Zeppelin. It didn't sell 50,000 copies on its initial release, but the Allman Brothers Band impressed everyone who heard it and nearly everyone who reviewed it. Coming out of the end of the 60s, it could have passed for a follow-up to the kind of blues rock coming out of England from acts like Cream, except that it had a sharper. The Allmans were American and Southern, and their understanding of blues, not to mention elements of jazz, mostly courtesy of Allman, was as natural as breathing. The album also introduced one of the band's most popular concert numbers, Whipping Post. Their debut album attracted good reviews and a cult following, with its mix of assured dual lead guitars by Duane Allman and Dickie Betts, soulful singing by Greg, and a rhythm section that was nearly as busy as the lead instruments between Oakley's rock-hard bass and the dual drumming of Trucks and Johansson. Their second album, 1970's Idlewild South, recorded predominantly at Criteria Studios in North Miami, Florida, was produced by Tom Dowd, who had previously recorded Cream. This was a magical combination. Dowd was completely attuned to the group's sound and goals, and Idlewild South broadened that sound, adding a softer acoustic texture to their mixture, and introducing Betts as a composer, including the original studio version of In Memory of Elizabeth Reed, an instrumental tribute to Miles Davis that would become a highlight of their shows in many different forms for the next 30 years. It also had a Greg Allman number, Midnight Rider, which became one of the band's more widely covered originals and the composer's signature tune, and one of my personal favorites. By this time, the group's concerts were becoming legendary for the extraordinarily complex yet coherent interplay between the two guitarists and Greg Allman's keyboards, sometimes in jams of 40 minutes or more to a single song without wasting a note. And unlike the art of rock bands of the era, they weren't interested in impressing anyone with how they played scales, how many different tunings they knew, or which classical riffs they could quote. Rather, the Allmans incorporated the techniques and structures of jazz and classical into their playing. In March 1971, the band played a series of shows at the Fillmore East that were recorded for posterity and subsequently transformed into their third album, At Fillmore East. This double LP issued in July of '71 became an instant classic, rivaling the previous blues rock touchstone cut at the Fillmore, Cream's Wheels of Fire. Duane Allman and his band were suddenly the new heroes to millions of mostly older teenage fans. Although it never cracked the top 10, At Fillmore East was certified gold on October 15th, 1971. Duane Allman died in a motorcycle accident 14 days later. The group had been midway through work on their next album, Eat a Peach, which they completed as a 5-piece, with Dickie Betts playing all of the remaining lead and slide guitar parts. Their second double album in a row became another instant classic, and their first album to reach the top 10, peaking at number 5. Despite having completed Eat a Peach, the band was intact in name only. Rather than trying to replace Duane as a guitarist, they decided to add a second soloist in the form of piano player Chuck Leavell. The group had already begun work on a long-delayed follow-up to Eat a Peach when Oakley was killed November '72 in a motorcycle accident only a few blocks from Allman's accident site. Lamar Williams was recruited on bass, and the new lineup continued the band's concert activities, as well as eventually finishing the group's next album, Brothers and Sisters, released on August 1st, 1973. During the extended gap in releases following Eat a Peach, Atco reissued the Allman Brothers Band and Idlewild South together as double LP Beginnings, which charted higher than either individual release. Brothers and Sisters marked the beginning of a new era. The album had a more easygoing and freewheeling sound, less bluesy and more country-ish. This was partly a result of Capricorn losing the services of Tom Dowd, who had produced their 3 previous albums. Additionally, Dickie Betts' full emergence as a songwriter and singer, as well as the band's only guitarist playing all of the lead and slide parts, altered the balance of the group's sound, pushing forth his distinct interest in country rock. Betts also became the reluctant, de facto leader of the band during this period, not from a desire for control, as much as because he was the only one with the comparative stability and creative input to take on the responsibility. The record occupied the #1 spot for 6 weeks, spurred by the #2 single Ramblin' Man, and became the Allman Brothers Band's most well-known album. It was an odd reversal of the usual order of success for a rock band. Usually, it was the release of an album that drew crowds to the concerts, but in this case, the months of touring the group had done paved the way for the album. The fact that it kept going pushed back only heightened fans' interest. Ironically, Brothers and Sisters was a less challenging record than the band's earlier releases, with a relatively laid-back sound, relaxed compared to the groundbreaking work on the group's previous 4 albums. But all of this hardly mattered, based on the reputation they'd established with their first 4 albums and the crowd-pleasing nature of Ramblin' Man and the Dickie Betts-composed instrumental Jessica. They were playing larger halls and bigger crowds than ever. An entire range of southern rock acts had started to make serious inroads into the charts in the wake of the Allman Brothers. Labels such as MCA and even Island Records began looking for the same audience, signing acts like Leonard Skinner, 38 Special, The Outlaws, respectively, among others. For the first time since the mid-50s, the heyday of the rockabilly era, a major part of the country was listening to rock and roll with a distinctly southern twang. The band began showing cracks in 1974, as Greg Allman and Dickie Betts both began solo careers recording albums separately from the group. Allman married Cher, an event that set him up in a Hollywood-based lifestyle that created a schism with the rest of the band. They might have survived all this, but for the increasing strain of the members' other personal habits. While drugs and alcohol had always been a significant part of lives of many in the group, as the strain and exhaustion of touring continued, coupled with the need to produce new music, these indulgences became out of control. In addition, Betts' leadership of the band created further strain for him. The group's difficulties were cased on their next album, the highly uneven Win, Lose or Draw, which lacked the intensity and sharpness of their prior work. The whole band wasn't present for some of the album, and Greg Allman's involvement with Cher, coupled with his serious drug problems, prevented him from participating with the rest of the group. His vocals were added separately on the other side of the country. The band finally came apart in 1976 when Allman found himself in the midst of a federal drug case against a supplier and agreed to testify against a friend and band employee. Leavell, Johansson, and Williams split to form Sea Level, which became a moderately successful band, cutting 4 albums for Capricorn over the next 4 years, while Betts pursued a solo career. All of them vowed never to work with Greg Allman again. Amid this split, Capricorn Records, reaching ever deeper into its vaults for anything that could generate income, issued 2 collections, a live double LP collection called Wipe the Windows, Check the Oil, Dollar Gas, showcasing the Brothers and Sisters era band at various concerts, and a double LP best of package and The Road Goes On Forever. Wipe the Windows was a modest seller, appearing as it did when the group's sales had already fallen off, and it was compared unfavorably with the legendary work on at Fillmore East. The studio compilation passed barely a ripple, however, because most of the fans already had stuff on the original albums. The members were all back together by 1978. However, and over the next 4 years, they issued a somewhat uneven series of albums. Enlightened Roll 1979 redeemed their reputation a little, produced by Tom Dowd, who had always managed to get the very best work out of the group. It had more energy than any record they issued in the last 6 years. It also restored the two-guitar lineup courtesy of Dan Toller from the Great Southern Dickie Betts Solo Band, who was brought in when Chuck Leavell, along with Lamar Williams, chose to remain in Sea Level. By that time, however, the Allmans were fighting against time and musical trends. Disco, punk, and power pop had pretty much stolen the thunder from the arena acts epitomized by the Allmans. Whatever interest they attracted was a matter of nostalgia for their earlier releases. The groups were in danger of becoming arena's rock third big oldies acts after the Moody Blues and Paul McCartney's Wings. The band did take a shot at their past glories with Enlightened Rogues, which garnered the most favorable fan and critical response since Brothers and Sisters, but the group's business affairs were in shambles owing to the bankruptcy of Capricorn Records in late '79. When the fallout from Capricorn's collapse settled, Polygram Records, the company's biggest creditor, took over the label's library, and the Allman Brothers were cut loose from their contract. Their signing to Arista enabled them to resume recording. What they released, however, was safe, unambitious, routinely commercial, pop, rock, closer in spirit to the Doobie Brothers than their own classic work, and a shadow of that work without any of the invention of daring upon which they built their reputations. The group's fortunes hit a further downturn when J-Mo was fired, breaking up one of the best rhythm sections in rock. For most of the 80s, the Allman Brothers were on hiatus, while the individual members sorted out their personal and professional situations. During those years, Greg released 2 solo albums and achieved some chart success with I'm No Angel, while Dickie released the critically acclaimed but somewhat overlooked Pattern Disruptive. In 1989, the band was reactivated again, partly owing to Polygram's decision to issue the 4-CD box set Retrospective Dreams. That set, coupled with the reissue of their entire Capricorn catalog on compact disc in the years leading up to the box's release, reminded millions of older listeners of the group's greatness and introduced the Allmans to millions of people too young to have been around for Watkins Glen, much less the Fillmore shows. They reunited and also added Warren Hayes from Dickie Betts Solo Band on lead guitar as a replacement for Toller. With Alan Woody playing bass, Chuck Leavell was gone, however, having agreed to join the Rolling Stones on tour as a resident keyboard player, and Lamar Williams had succumbed to cancer in 1983. The new lineup reinvigorated the band, which signed with Epic Records and surprised everyone with their first release, 7 Turns. Issued in 1990, it got some of the best reviews and healthiest sales they had seen in more than a decade. The next year, they filled out their rhythm section with the addition of percussionist Mark Quiones and released Shades of Two Worlds, viewed by some fans as their strongest studio outing since Brothers and Sisters, although it rose no higher than 85 on the charts. Their next studio album, 1994's Where It All Begins, was a solid record that achieved gold status, but 2 live albums from the same period, An Evening with the Allman Brothers Band and Second Set, which won a Grammy for its performance of Jessica, were steady although not massive sellers. The decline in sales wasn't the fault of the material, so much as a natural result of the passage of time, which left the Allmans competing with 2 decades worth of successors and rivals. In 1997, Warren Hayes and Alan Woody left the Allman Brothers Band to form the power trio Government Mule. Stepping in were bassist Oteil Burbridge and, for a time, Nashville guitarist Jack Pearson. In 1999, Pearson was replaced by young guitar phenom Derek Trucks, Butch's nephew. In 2000, the year that bassist Alan Woody died, the band took what many older fans might view as an unthinkable step, parting ways with original guitarist Dickie Betts, and thereby setting up a new round of recriminations among the group's original founders. However, far from signaling the demise of the Allman Brothers Band, the group ultimately re-emerged, reinvigorated in the opinion of many listeners, with the establishment of one of its strongest lineup in years, featuring the dual guitars of Warren Hayes, who returned in 2001, and Derek Trucks, the powerful yet fluid and jazzy bass of Oteil. Burbridge, and some of Gregg Allman's most committed vocal and organ work in years, and the ever-reliable drum tandem of Butch Trucks and J-Mo, supplemented by new percussionist Keonis. They remained a top concert attraction decades after their last historically important album, easily drawing more than 20,000 fans at a time to outdoor venues or booking 3,000-seat theaters for 3 weeks at a time. Their back catalog, especially the first 5 albums, remain consistent sellers on compact disc and downloads. Apart from their Arista releases, the Allman Brothers Band remained remarkably consistent, altering their music only gradually over 40 years. They continued soaring at their concerts and on most of their records after 2001. Released in 2003, Hittin' the Note was hailed as their best album in decades, while the Live at the Beacon Theater DVD showed why they sold out 220 consecutive shows at that New York venue, the standing record. They played at Eric Clapton's Crossroads Festival twice, and starting in 2005, presented their own Wani Fest in Live Oak, Florida. In 2012, the group was presented with the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Grammys, a fitting addition to their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame status, which was conferred in 1995, the band's first year of eligibility. In the early days of 2014, Haynes and Derek Trucks released a joint press announcement stating that they were both leaving the band at the end of the year. The group played their final live show at the Beacon Theater on October 28, 2014. Butch Trucks, one of the 4 remaining living founders of the Allman Brothers Band, and one of the 3 who were still members of the ensemble in its last incarnation, died January 24, 2017 at the age of 69. And then 4 months later, Gregg Allman died on May 27th at his home in Savannah, Georgia, also at the age of 69. In September 2019, the ABB issued Fillmore West 71, a 4-disc set called From the Original Reel-to-Reel soundboard tapes at 3 shows at the famed San Francisco as the middle act playing between headliners Hot Tuna and opener Trinidad Tripoli Steel Band. They were recorded 2 months before the famed at Fillmore East concerts and included not only other versions of signature tunes such as In Memory of Elizabeth Reed and Whipping Post, but also set standards that didn't make the Fillmore East set, including Midnight Rider, Don't Keep Me Wondering, Dreams, and a cover of Willie Dixon's Hoochie Coochie Man.